The water came up dark and foul when Delilah O'Brien drew the first bucket that morning in May of 1878, and she knew immediately that someone had finally made good on their threats. She stood at the edge of her well in White Pine, Nevada, staring down into the depths where her livelihood had just been murdered, her hands trembling on the rope as the stench of something chemical and poisonous rose up to meet her nostrils. The sun was barely cresting the desert mountains to the east, painting the scrubland in shades of gold and rust, but all Delilah could see was the ruin of everything she had fought to build since her father died 6 months ago. She set the bucket down carefully, her mind racing through possibilities, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The Garrett brothers had been pressuring her to sell since the day after the funeral, their offers growing more aggressive each time she refused. They wanted her land, wanted the access to the underground springs that made this particular patch of Nevada worth something, and they had made it clear they did not appreciate a 23-year-old woman standing in their way. Her father had been respected, but she was just an obstacle to men like them. Delilah walked back to the small ranch house her father had built with his own hands, her boots kicking up dust with each step. The chickens scattered from her path, sensing her agitation. Inside, she poured herself the last of yesterday's clean water and sat at the kitchen table, forcing herself to think clearly. Without water, she had maybe 3 days before she would have to abandon the property. The nearest town well was 5 miles away, and she could not haul enough water daily to keep her horses, chickens, and herself alive. The Garretts knew this. They had planned this precisely. She spent the morning confirming what she already knew. Every bucket came up the same, that dark tinge and chemical smell that made her eyes water. Someone had dumped something down there in the night, probably lye or worse. The well was deep, fed by an underground source that had never failed in 15 years. Now it was worse than useless. It was a monument to her vulnerability. By noon, Delilah had hitched up her wagon and was preparing to ride into White Pine proper to report the crime, though she held little hope that Sheriff Morrison would do anything about it. He played cards with the Garretts every Saturday night. She was checking the harness on her mare when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the south. The rider came into view slowly, a tall figure on a paint horse, leading a pack mule behind him. As he drew closer, Delilah could make out more details. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a dusty brown hat. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more of his life in the saddle than out of it. His clothes were worn but well maintained, and he had the lean, weathered look of a man who worked hard for his living. He reined in his horse at a respectful distance from the house, raising one hand in greeting. "Morning, miss. Name's Kane Mitchell. I am looking for work, and I heard in town that Henry O'Brien had a ranch out this way that might need a hand." Delilah felt her throat tighten at the mention of her father's name. "Henry O'Brien was my father. He passed last November." Kane's expression shifted immediately to one of genuine sympathy. He removed his hat, revealing more of his sun-bronzed face. "I am real sorry to hear that, miss. I met your father once, about 3 years back, when I was passing through. He helped me out when my horse threw a shoe. He was a good man." "He was," Delilah agreed, studying this stranger carefully. She needed help desperately, but trust was a luxury she could not afford easily. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Whatever needs doing. I can handle horses, mend fences, work cattle if you have them. I am handy with repairs." He gestured toward the house and barn with his hat. "Looks like you are running this place yourself now." "I am." Delilah made a decision, the kind of impulsive choice her father would have cautioned her against, but desperation made people bold. "I have got a problem, Mr. Mitchell. Someone poisoned my well last night. I cannot pay much, but if you can help me figure out a solution, I will give you 3 meals a day and whatever cash I can spare." Kane's jaw tightened, and she saw anger flash across his features. "Poisoned your well? Who would do something like that?" "I have my suspicions. The Garrett brothers have been trying to buy me out." Delilah crossed her arms, partly defensive, partly to stop herself from showing how scared she really was. Without water, I will have to sell or abandon the place in a matter of days. The cowboy was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. Then he dismounted, leading his horse closer. Let me take a look at that well, Miss O'Brien. Maybe it is not as bad as you think. It is bad, she said flatly, but she led him over to the well anyway. Kane leaned over the edge, sniffing carefully, then drew up a bucket. He examined the water closely, even dipped a cautious finger in, and rubbed it against his thumb. His expression grew grimmer. This is lye or something similar. This well is not going to be usable for a long time, maybe never. I am sorry. Delilah had known it, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. She turned away, blinking hard against the burning in her eyes. She would not cry in front of a stranger. But, Kane continued, and she whipped back around to face him, that does not mean you do not have water on this property. Your father chose this spot for a reason. There are underground springs all through this area. We just need to find another access point and dig a new well. Dig a new well? Delilah stared at him. That could take weeks. I do not have weeks. It could take weeks if you are unlucky, Kane agreed. But if we are smart about it and we work hard, we might be able to hit water in a few days. I have done it before. The key is reading the land correctly. Hope was a dangerous thing, but Delilah felt it flickering to life in her chest anyway. You really think you could do it? I can try. Kane looked around the property, his gaze assessing. I will need some tools, and it is going to be hard work. But I have got nothing but time, and it sounds like you need help right now. Sometimes that is reason enough. Delilah studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She had learned to be suspicious of men offering help, especially men she did not know. But there was something straightforward in Kane's expression, an honesty in his eyes that made her want to trust him. Her father had always said you could tell a lot about a man by his eyes. All right, she said finally. We will try it. But I need to be clear, Mr. Mitchell. I cannot pay you much money. Times are hard, and without water, I am close to broke. Call me Kane, he said with a slight smile. And I already told you, I work for meals and whatever you can spare. I am not doing this for money. I am doing it because what happened to you is not right, and because your father once helped me when he did not have to. Consider it paying forward a debt. They shook hands on it, and Delilah felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. This was a man who knew hard work intimately. Kane spent the rest of that day studying the property. Delilah watched him walk the land, sometimes crouching to examine the soil, other times just standing still with his eyes closed, as if he could hear something she could not. He looked at the way the sparse vegetation grew, paying particular attention to where things seemed greener or more vigorous. He examined the slope of the land and the rock formations that broke through the desert floor. While he worked, Delilah dealt with the immediate crisis of water. She took her wagon into White Pine and filled every container she owned from the public well, paying the fee with coins she could barely afford to spare. As she worked the pump handle, Martha Hensley from the general store approached her with a concerned expression. Delilah, dear, I heard about your well. That is just terrible. Martha was one of the few people in town who had been kind to her since her father's death. Do you know what happened? Someone poisoned it deliberately, Delilah said bluntly. Put lye or something worse down there. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, honey, do you think it was the Garretts? Yes. Delilah hauled another bucket up and poured it into her barrel. But I cannot prove it, and even if I could, the sheriff would not do anything. This is not right, Martha said, her voice trembling with anger. A woman alone should be able to live in peace without men trying to steal what is hers. Should be, Delilah agreed. But we both know that is not how it works. What are you going to do? I hired a hand. He thinks he can dig a new well and find water. Delilah straightened up, wiping sweat from her forehead. We are going to try anyway. A hand? Delilah, you barely know anyone around here. Be careful. His name is Kane Mitchell. He knew my father. Delilah loaded the last barrel onto her wagon. I do not have a lot of choices, Martha. It is trust him or lose everything. The older woman looked troubled but nodded. If you need anything, you let me know. Joe and I will help however we can. By the time Delilah returned to the ranch, the sun was lowering toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She found Kane near the barn, driving a stake into the ground. Found something? She called out as she climbed down from the wagon. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his pants. I think so. There is a spot about 50 yards east of your current well, where all the signs point to water being close to the surface. The soil is different there, stays damper. There is a cluster of rabbit brush that looks healthier than it should given how dry it has been. And the rock formation suggests there might be a natural channel underneath. Might be, Delilah repeated. That is all I can give you, Kane said honestly. There are no guarantees when you are looking for water, but I have got a good feeling about this spot. They spent the evening unloading Delilah's water barrels and setting up a camp near the marked location. Delilah cooked supper over the outdoor fire, simple beans and bacon with coffee, and they ate in companionable silence as the desert cooled around them. The stars began to emerge, thousands of them scattered across the darkening sky like diamonds on velvet. Your father built a good place here, Kane said eventually, looking around at the ranch. You can see he put thought into everything. He did, Delilah agreed softly. He dreamed about this land for years before we came here, saved every penny. When we finally bought it, I thought he might burst from happiness. She smiled at the memory, though it hurt. He said this was going to be our legacy, mine and any family I might have someday. He wanted to build something that would last. Sounds like he succeeded. He did not get to see it finished. There was so much more he wanted to do. Delilah stared into the fire. And now someone is trying to take it away before I can finish it for him. Kane was quiet for a moment. We are not going to let that happen. Tomorrow morning, we start digging. They began at dawn, when the air was still cool enough to make hard, physical labor bearable. Kane had selected tools from Delilah's barn, a pickaxe and several shovels, along with rope and buckets for hauling out dirt and rock. He stripped off his shirt after the first hour, working in just his undershirt, and Delilah tried not to notice the play of muscles across his shoulders as he swung the pick. She worked alongside him, using a shovel to clear away the loosened earth that Kane broke free. It was brutally hard work. The ground was compact and studded with rocks that had to be pried out carefully. The sun climbed higher, and even the relative cool of early May in Nevada became oppressive. Sweat poured down both their faces, and their hands quickly developed new blisters on top of old calluses. They worked in shifts, one person digging, while the other hauled dirt away in buckets or rested in the shade. Delilah had done hard physical labor all her life, but well digging was something else entirely. By noon of the first day, they were only 4 feet down, and Kane said they would need to go at least 20 feet, possibly more. During one of their water breaks, sitting in the shade of the barn, Kane asked her about the Garretts. How long have they been pressuring you? Since the funeral, Delilah said bitterly. The day after we buried my father, Marcus Garrett rode out here with an offer. When I said no, he got angry, told me I was being foolish, that a woman could not run a ranch alone. I told him to get off my property. And they have been after you since? They started subtle, offering to buy my cattle at prices so low it was insulting, spreading rumors in town that I was going under. Then they got less subtle. Fences cut, equipment going missing, and now this. She gestured toward the poisoned well. They want me desperate enough to sell for nothing. Kane's expression was dark. Men like that make me sick. They see someone vulnerable, and they circle like vultures. I am not vulnerable, Delilah said sharply, then caught herself. Or I am trying not to be. You are not, Kane said firmly. Vulnerable people give up. You are fighting. That is different. Something about the way he said it, the respect in his voice, made Delilah's chest feel warm. She was not used to people taking her seriously, especially men. They returned to work, and the afternoon passed in a blur of aching muscles and stubborn earth. By the time the sun set on that first day, they were 7 feet down, standing in a hole that required a ladder to climb out of. Both of them were covered in dirt and exhausted beyond words. Delilah cooked another simple meal, and they ate mostly in silence, too tired for much conversation. Kane bedded down in the barn while Delilah retreated to the house, but she found herself lying awake long into the night, listening to the sounds of the desert and thinking about the stranger who had appeared exactly when she needed help most. The second day was harder than the first. Every muscle in Delilah's body screamed in protest when she woke, and she could see Kane moving stiffly as well when she emerged from the house at dawn. But they returned to the hole without complaint and resumed their work. As they dug deeper, the work became more complicated. The walls of the well had to be shored up with timber to prevent collapse. They had to rig a pulley system to haul the buckets of dirt up from increasing depths. Kane worked with focused intensity, checking the soil constantly for any sign of dampness that would indicate they were approaching water. Around mid-morning of the second day, 2 riders appeared on the horizon. Delilah, who was hauling dirt at the time, felt her stomach drop when she recognized Marcus and John Garrett. "Kane," she called down into the well. "We have company." He emerged quickly, climbing the ladder and pulling his shirt back on. By the time the Garrett brothers rode into the yard, Kane was standing beside Delilah, his presence solid and reassuring. Marcus Garrett was a big man, barrel-chested and red-faced, with the look of someone who was used to getting his way through intimidation. His brother John was leaner, quieter, but with mean eyes that always made Delilah's skin crawl. "Delilah," Marcus said, not bothering to tip his hat or offer any other courtesy. "We heard you had some trouble with your well." "You heard right," she said coldly. "Funny how fast news travels. Real shame that." Marcus did not sound sympathetic at all. "Without water, I do not see how you can keep this place running. We are prepared to make you a fair offer. $500 for the land and everything on it." "$500?" Delilah's voice rose. "This land is worth 10 times that, and you know it." "Not without water, it is not," John said with a nasty smile. Kane stepped forward slightly, drawing the brothers' attention. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. "Kane Mitchell. I work here." "Funny, I did not hear that Delilah was hiring." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What exactly are you doing here?" "Digging a new well," Kane said calmly. "Going to hit water any day now." The brothers exchanged glances. "That's so?" Marcus turned his attention back to Delilah. "You are wasting your money and his time. You are not going to find water. Best to cut your losses and sell while you still can." "The answer is no," Delilah said firmly. "Now get off my property." Marcus's face darkened. "You are making a mistake, girl. You think this drifter is going to save you? He will take what he can and move on, just like his type always does. You will be left with nothing." "I said get off my property." Delilah's hand dropped to the rifle she had propped against the barn wall, within easy reach. She was a good shot, and everyone in the county knew it. The brothers stared at her for a long moment, then Marcus spat into the dirt. "Have it your way. But when you are begging in the streets of White Pine, do not come crying to us." They wheeled their horses around and rode off, kicking up clouds of dust. Delilah watched them go, her heart pounding. "Those are the men who poisoned your well?" Kane asked quietly. "I am sure of it. They seem to think you are not going to find water." "Maybe they are right." Delilah slumped against the barn wall, suddenly exhausted. "Maybe I am just being stubborn and stupid." Kane turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Look at me, Delilah." She did, meeting his eyes. "You are not stupid. You are brave. and I do not know if we are going to find water or not, but I know we are going to try our damnedest. That is all anyone can do." She nodded, feeling steadier. "Then let us get back to work." They returned to the well, and Kane disappeared down into the hole, while Delilah managed the pulley system. The day wore on, hot and exhausting. 15 feet down, 17 feet, 20 feet. And then, as the sun was beginning its descent toward evening, Kane called up from the bottom of the well in a voice Delilah had never heard from him before. "Delilah, the soil is getting damp. I think we are close." She leaned over the edge, hardly daring to believe it. "Are you sure?" "Positive. Look at this." He held up a handful of earth, and even from the surface, she could see the dark wetness clinging to it. They worked with renewed energy, barely stopping for water or rest. Kane dug deeper, and now every bucket that came up was heavier with moisture. 22 feet, 24 feet, and then just as the last light was fading from the sky, Delilah heard him shout, "Water! I hit water!" She grabbed the lantern and hung it over the well, peering down. At the bottom, she could see water beginning to pool around Kane's boots, seeping up from below. Clear, beautiful water. Tears streamed down Delilah's face as she watched the water rise. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." Kane climbed up the ladder, soaking wet from the knees down, his face split by an enormous grin. When he reached the top, Delilah threw her arms around him without thinking, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder. "Thank you so much." Kane's arms came around her, holding her carefully. "We did it together," he said. "This was both of us." They stood like that for a long moment, and when Delilah finally pulled back, she was suddenly aware of how close they were, how she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes in the lantern light. Something passed between them, a spark of awareness that made her breath catch. Kane cleared his throat and stepped back, though his eyes never left hers. "We should let it fill overnight, then test the water in the morning, make sure it is clean and good." "Right," Delilah agreed, her voice slightly unsteady. "Right, of course." They had supper that night in a state of exhausted celebration. Delilah found a bottle of whiskey her father had kept for special occasions and poured them each a small glass. They toasted to water, to hard work, to small victories against powerful enemies. As they sat by the fire, the adrenaline of the day slowly wearing off, they began to talk more freely than they had before. Kane told her about growing up on a ranch in Colorado, learning horses from his father before a bad winter, and a series of poor decisions had cost his family everything. He had been drifting ever since, working where he could, never staying long in one place. "Why not?" Delilah asked. "Why keep moving?" Kane was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I guess I never found a reason to stay put. After we lost the ranch, it felt like nowhere was really home anymore. Easier to keep moving than to put down roots that might get torn up again." "That sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted, "but it is also safe. You cannot lose what you do not have." Delilah understood that philosophy, though she disagreed with it. "My father used to say that nothing worth having comes without risk. He risked everything to buy this land, and even though he did not get to see it flourish, I am glad he took that chance." "He sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." She smiled sadly. "Stubborn as hell, but wise." "You take after him, then." She laughed, a real laugh that felt good after days of stress and fear. "I suppose I do." The next morning, they tested the water from the new well. It came up clear and sweet, with none of the chemical taint of the poisoned well. Delilah could have cried again from sheer relief. They spent the day building a proper structure around the new well, installing a pump mechanism that Kane rigged up from parts in the barn and some pieces he rode into town to purchase. As word spread in White Pine that Delilah had found water again, reactions were mixed. Martha Hensley was delighted, stopping by with fresh bread and congratulations. Others seemed disappointed, and Delilah knew those were the ones who had been hoping to see her fail. The Garrett brothers did not show their faces, but she could feel their anger like a storm cloud on the horizon. Kane stayed. The job was done, the well was dug, but when Delilah offered him payment for his work and expected him to move on, he asked if she might need a hand with the other work around the ranch. They were well into summer now, and there was always plenty to do. She said yes before she fully thought about what it meant, and he moved his things from the barn into the small bunkhouse her father had built for hired men. Days turned into weeks, and Delilah found herself growing accustomed to Kane's presence. More than accustomed, if she was honest with herself. She enjoyed working alongside him, enjoyed their conversations in the evening, enjoyed the way he made her laugh with dry observations about the chickens, or the stubborn old mare who refused to be led by anyone but Delilah. He was good company, and she realized how much she had missed having someone to talk to since her father's death. But there was more than just companionship growing between them. Delilah found herself noticing things she should not notice. The strength in Kane's hands as he worked, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his voice in the morning when he greeted her outside the house. She caught him watching her sometimes, too, with an expression she could not quite read, but that made her heart beat faster. They were careful with each other, maintaining a respectful distance even as the attraction between them grew more obvious. Kane never presumed, never overstepped, and Delilah was grateful for that, even as part of her wished he would. One evening in late June, they were sitting on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set in spectacular fashion across the Nevada desert. The air was cooling from the heat of the day, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "I have been thinking," Kane said carefully, "about my wages." Delilah's heart sank. Was he going to ask for more money? She was barely scraping by as it was. "What about them?" "I do not need the cash," he said. "What I would like, if you are agreeable, is a partnership." She turned to stare at him. "A partnership?" "This ranch needs a lot of work to reach its potential. You need help, consistent help from someone who cares about the place. I could provide that." He met her eyes steadily. "In exchange, I would like a stake in the ranch. Nothing big, just enough that I know I am building something for myself, too, not just working for wages that will disappear." Delilah's mind raced. It was a bold ask, and part of her immediately wanted to refuse. This was her father's ranch, her legacy. But another part of her, the practical part, knew that Kane was right. She could not run this place alone forever, and she trusted him more than anyone else in White Pine. "What percentage were you thinking?" she asked cautiously. 25%. I keep working like I have been, helping build this place up. Any profits get split according to ownership. It was fair, more than fair. Delilah knew that, but it still felt huge, like she was giving up a piece of her father's dream. Then again, her father had always believed in rewarding honest work and loyalty. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course. Take all the time you need." She thought about it for 3 days, weighing the options, considering the risks. In the end, it came down to trust. Did she trust Kane Mitchell? The answer, she realized, was yes. He had shown up when she needed help most, and had asked for nothing in return. He had worked himself to exhaustion to save her ranch. He had stayed when he could have moved on. If she could not trust a man like that, then who could she trust? "All right," she told him on the third evening. 25%. We will draw up papers in town to make it legal." Kane's face broke into a smile that made her insides flutter. "You will not regret this, Delilah. I promise you that." "I better not," she said, trying to sound stern but unable to hide her own smile. They rode into White Pine the next day and had the lawyer draw up a partnership agreement. Marcus Garrett was in the lawyer's office when they arrived, and his face turned purple with rage when he realized what they were doing. "You are making a mistake, O'Brien," he hissed at Delilah as they passed in the hallway. "Funny," Delilah said coolly. From where I am standing, the only mistake I made was not doing this sooner. As summer deepened, the ranch began to thrive in ways it never had before. With two people working full time, they were able to accomplish twice as much. They repaired all the fences, expanded the vegetable garden, and bought a small herd of cattle with money they saved from selling eggs and vegetables in town. Kane proved to have a gift for horse training, and they began taking in animals that needed breaking or retraining, adding another stream of income. Through it all, the tension between them grew. They were dancing around something neither of them wanted to name, but it was there in every accidental touch, every shared glance, every moment of laughter. Delilah had never felt this way about anyone before. She had been so focused on helping her father build the ranch that she had never had time for courting or romance. Now, at 23, she was discovering these feelings for the first time, and they were overwhelming. She thought Kane felt the same way, but he never said anything. Always the gentleman, always respectful. It was driving her crazy. The breaking point came in early August. They had been working on constructing a new chicken coop, and Delilah was up on a ladder nailing boards into place. She reached too far, lost her balance, and fell backward with a cry of alarm. Kane caught her. His arms went around her waist, and he staggered slightly under her weight but kept his feet. For a moment they stayed frozen like that, Delilah's back against Kane's chest, his arms tight around her. Then she turned in his embrace, and suddenly they were face to face, so close she could feel his breath on her lips. Neither of them moved. Neither of them seemed to breathe. "Delilah," Kane said, his voice rough. "I should not—" "Why not?" she interrupted. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Why should you not?" "Because you are my partner. Because I work for you. Because I do not want you to think I am taking advantage." She kissed him, just leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his protests. For a second, he froze in shock. Then his arms tightened around her, and he was kissing her back with a passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day we found water," he admitted. "I have wanted you to do it since then too," Delilah said. "So why did not you?" "Because I was scared," he said honestly. "Scared that you did not feel the same way. Scared that I would mess this up. Scared that I was not good enough for you." She pulled back to look at him properly. "Not good enough? Kane, you saved my life, my home, everything I care about. You are the best man I have ever known. I am a drifter with nothing to my name but a horse and 25% of a ranch I did not earn." "You earned every bit of it," Delilah said fiercely. "And you are not a drifter anymore. You are home." Something shifted in Kane's eyes, a wall coming down that she had not even realized was there. "Am I? Is this home? If you want it to be." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, and Delilah felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, Kane was smiling, really smiling, in a way she had never seen before. "I love you," he said. "I know it is too fast. I know I should probably wait. But I love you, Delilah O'Brien." "I love you too," she said, laughing with pure joy. "I love you, Kane Mitchell." They courted properly after that, though it seemed a bit backward given that they were already living on the same property and running a business together. Kane started taking his meals in the main house instead of the bunkhouse. They held hands while they walked the property in the evenings. They stole kisses when the work allowed. The people of White Pine noticed, of course. Small towns always noticed everything. Most people were happy for them. Martha Hensley openly wept with joy when Delilah told her. Others were less pleased, the Garretts chief among them. But Delilah found she did not care what the Garretts thought anymore. They had tried to destroy her and failed. She had won, and she had found love in the process. In September, 3 months after that first kiss, Kane proposed. They were sitting by their well, the one they had dug together, watching the stars come out. He did not have a ring, but he had something better, a piece of paper showing that he had transferred 10% of his share of the ranch back to her, bringing her ownership up to 60%. I want you to know that I am not doing this because of the ranch, he said seriously. I would marry you if we had nothing but the clothes on our backs. But I also want you to know that I understand this place is your father's legacy, and I will never do anything to threaten that. You will always have controlling interest. Always. Delilah took the paper with shaking hands, then set it aside and cupped Kane's face in her palms. You foolish, wonderful man. I do not care about percentages. I trust you completely. Ask me what you want to ask me. Kane pulled out a simple gold band that he said had belonged to his mother. Delilah O'Brien, will you marry me? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in October in the small church in White Pine, with half the town in attendance. Martha Hensley cried through the entire ceremony. The pastor, a kind man who had known Delilah's father, spoke about how Henry O'Brien would have been proud to see his daughter so happy. Delilah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved, and Kane wore a new suit he had bought especially for the occasion. The Garretts did not attend, but Delilah noticed that their harassment had stopped completely after the engagement was announced. Perhaps they had finally accepted that she was not going anywhere, or perhaps having a husband made her seem like less of a target. Either way, she was grateful for the peace. The wedding reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food provided by seemingly everyone in town. There was dancing and laughter and joy, and as Delilah danced with her new husband under the stars, she felt her father's presence like a benediction. He would have liked you, she told Kane as they swayed to the music. My father. He would have respected the way you work, the way you care about the land, the way you care about me. I wish I could have known him better, Kane said, but I am grateful he built this place because it led me to you. Their first year of marriage was not easy. Ranching never was. They faced a harsh winter, lost some cattle to disease, and dealt with equipment breakdowns and money troubles. But they faced it all together, and somehow that made even the hardest days bearable. They laughed together, worked together, planned together. They built a life. In the spring of 1879, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She told Kane one morning over breakfast, barely able to contain her excitement. He dropped his coffee cup in shock, then swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and told him to be careful. We are going to have a baby, he kept saying, wonder in his voice. We are going to have a baby. Their son was born in December of 1879, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Henry, after Delilah's father, with the middle name of Mitchell. Little Henry was strong-lunged and hungry, and from the first day he had both his parents wrapped around his tiny fingers. Kane proved to be a devoted father, getting up for night feedings, walking the floor with Henry when he was fussy, staring at him with an expression of such love and awe that it made Delilah's heart ache. She watched her husband with their son and felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. As Henry grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They added more cattle, built a second barn, and expanded the house to include more bedrooms for what they hoped would be a growing family. Kane's instincts about the land proved correct again and again. The well he had dug never failed, producing clean, sweet water year after year. The old well, the poisoned one, they filled in completely and planted a tree over it, a cottonwood that Kane said would serve as a reminder. Of what? Delilah had asked. That something beautiful can grow even in a place where someone tried to destroy you, he had replied. In 1881, Delilah became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Kane's mother. Rose was smaller than Henry had been, but just as determined, crying lustily from the moment she entered the world. Henry, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her. The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. By 1883, they had 4 children: Henry, Rose, a second son named James, and another daughter they called Lily. The house was always full of noise and laughter, the chaos of a large family living and working together. Kane never drifted again. He had found his home, found his purpose, found his family. Sometimes, when he and Delilah sat on the porch in the evenings watching their children play in the yard, he would turn to her and say, "Thank you." "For what?" she would always ask, though she knew the answer. "For giving me a reason to stay, for trusting me, for loving me." "Thank you for digging that well," she would reply, "for saving my home, for staying when you could have left, for choosing me." The Garrett brothers eventually gave up on acquiring the O'Brien ranch. Marcus died in 1885 of a heart attack, and John moved away the following year, selling his holdings to a rancher from California. Delilah felt no particular triumph at their departure. They were simply part of a difficult past, and she was too busy living her present to dwell on old enemies. In 1888, when Delilah was 33 and Kane was 35, they made the decision to expand their holdings. They purchased the property adjacent to theirs, doubling the size of their ranch. It was a risk, taking on that much debt, but they had learned to trust their instincts and each other. The investment paid off. Within 3 years, they had not only paid off the loan, but were prospering in ways they had never imagined back in those desperate days of 1878. Henry O'Brien Mitchell, their eldest, showed a talent for working with horses that rivaled his father's. By the time he was 15, people were bringing their animals from 3 counties away for him to train. Rose had her mother's head for business and kept the ranch's books with meticulous care. James loved the cattle and spent his days riding the range, and Lily, the youngest, seemed to have a gift for growing things. Her vegetable garden produced 3 times what Delilah's had ever managed. On a warm evening in May of 1893, exactly 15 years after Kane had first ridden onto the property, Delilah and Kane walked out to the well they had dug together. The cottonwood tree over the old well had grown tall and strong, its leaves rustling in the breeze. The new well, their well, still produced the same clear, sweet water it always had. "Do you remember that day?" Delilah asked, though she knew he did. They had told the story so many times to their children that it had taken on the quality of legend in their family. "Every detail," Kane said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever met, standing there, losing everything, but determined not to give up. I remember thinking you must be crazy," Delilah admitted with a laugh, "promising to find water when everyone said it was impossible." "We were both a little crazy," Kane agreed, "but it worked out." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. In the distance, they could hear their children laughing, the sound of horses in the barn, the peaceful evening sounds of a working ranch. "It is everything my father dreamed of," Delilah said softly. "Everything and more. I wish he could see it." "I think he can," Kane said, "and I think he would be proud, not just of the ranch, but of you, of who you have become, of the family we have built." "We built it together," Delilah reminded him, the same thing she always said when he gave her too much credit. "Yes," Kane agreed, pulling her closer. "Together, that is how everything good happens. Together." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Delilah thought about that terrible morning when she had drawn up poisoned water and thought her world was ending. She thought about the stranger on a paint horse who had offered help when she had no reason to trust him. She thought about digging through desert soil with bleeding hands, about the moment water had finally seeped up from the ground, about all the moments that had led from there to here. She thought about love and trust and the courage it took to let someone help you when you were used to standing alone. She thought about the difference between surviving and thriving, and how sometimes the distance between the two was just one person willing to stay. The children called them in for supper, and Delilah and Kane turned back toward the house together, hands clasped, walking in step the way they always had. Behind them, the well they had dug together stood as a testament to what was possible when two people chose to build something rather than destroy, to hope rather than despair, to love rather than fear. The water that had once been threatened was now secure, flowing freely to nourish not just the land, but the family that tended it. And in the end, that was all any of them had ever wanted: a chance to grow something good, to build something lasting, to create a legacy of love that would outlive them both. Years continued to pass, each one adding another layer to the story of the Mitchell Ranch. In 1895, Henry married a girl from White Pine named Sarah, and they built a house on the eastern section of the property. Rose met a young man who worked at the bank in town, a serious fellow named Daniel, who treated her like she hung the moon. They married in the spring of 1897, and Daniel became the ranch's official accountant, managing their increasingly complex finances with skill and dedication. James and Lily were still young, but they showed every sign of wanting to stay on the ranch as well, to be part of the growing family enterprise. The Mitchell Ranch was becoming exactly what Delilah's father had dreamed of: a multi-generational family operation, a place where children and grandchildren would work the same land, tend the same soil, drink from the same well. In 1898, Delilah became a grandmother for the first time when Henry and Sarah welcomed a son. The baby was named Kane, after his grandfather, and when they placed him in Kane Mitchell's arms for the first time, the tough cowboy who had faced down claim jumpers and droughts and every hardship the West could throw at him wept openly with joy. "This is what it is all about," he told Delilah that night as they prepared for bed. "This continuity, this sense that what we build matters because it will go on beyond us." "My father understood that," Delilah said. "That is why he sacrificed so much to buy this land. He wanted to create something permanent in a world where everything seemed temporary." "He succeeded," Kane said firmly. "Through you, through us, through our children, and now our grandchildren. He succeeded beyond what he probably ever imagined." The old poisoned well, long since filled and marked by the thriving cottonwood tree, had become a family landmark. Children played in its shade, couples courted beneath its branches, and family gatherings were often held in the pleasant space it created. Something that had been meant to destroy had instead become a source of beauty and life. In the summer of 1900, as the new century dawned, the Mitchell family held a celebration at the ranch. It was partly to mark the new century, partly to celebrate the 22nd anniversary of the founding of the ranch, and partly just an excuse to bring everyone together. Nearly 100 people attended, including workers from the ranch, friends from town, and family members who had traveled from as far away as Colorado and California. Martha Hensley, now elderly but still sharp as ever, cornered Delilah at the celebration. "You know," she said, "I remember when you came to that public well, hauling water with barely enough money to pay for it, and I was so worried about you. I thought those Garrett brothers were going to crush you for sure." "A lot of people thought that," Delilah said with a smile. "But you did not let them. And then that cowboy showed up, and I remember thinking, he is either going to save her or break her heart." Martha smiled. "I am glad it was the former." "So am I," Delilah said, watching Kane across the yard where he was showing young Kane how to rope a fence post, while Henry and Sarah looked on with proud parent smiles. "So am I." As the party continued into the evening, with music and dancing and the kind of joy that only comes from a community celebrating together, Delilah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here. 22 years ago, she had been a frightened young woman facing the loss of everything. Now she was a matriarch, a successful businesswoman, a mother and grandmother, surrounded by love and prosperity. It had not been easy. There had been hard years, lean times, moments when they had to scrape and struggle. There had been losses too. Martha Hensley's husband Joe had passed away in 1896. Several of their horses had been lost to colic and injury over the years. There had been droughts and floods, disease and accidents, all the trials that came with ranching life. But through it all, they had each other. Delilah and Kane, partners in every sense of the word, facing each challenge as a team. And that, she realized, was the real miracle. Not the well that had saved her ranch, though that had been important. Not the prosperity they had built, though that was significant. The real miracle was finding someone who stayed, someone who chose to build rather than destroy, someone who loved her enough to dig through 24 feet of desert hardpan, looking for water on nothing but hope and determination. Late that night, after the guests had gone and the children and grandchildren had settled into various beds around the property, Delilah and Kane took their customary evening walk. The moon was full, bright enough to cast shadows, and the desert air was cooling from the heat of the day. They ended up, as they often did, at the well. Their well, the one that had changed everything. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not stopped here that day?" Delilah asked. "If you had ridden right past looking for work somewhere else?" Kane was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I used to wonder. In the early days, I would think about all the coincidences that had to line up perfectly. If I had taken a different trail, or stopped in a different town, or if your father had not helped me that one time 3 years before, so I did not know to come looking for work here. Any of those things could have changed everything." "But," Delilah prompted, hearing the unfinished thought. "But I do not think it was coincidence," Kane said. "I think I was supposed to find you. I think we were supposed to save this place together. I think everything in my life before that moment was leading me here, to you, to this." Delilah leaned into his side, and his arm came around her automatically. "You sound like a romantic," she teased gently. "I am a romantic," he said with no embarrassment. "You made me one. Before you, I thought the safest thing was to never care too much, never put down roots, never risk losing something important. You taught me that the risk is worth it, that building something, loving someone, creating a home is worth every possible heartbreak." "And has there been heartbreak?" Delilah asked. "No," Kane said simply. "Not with you. Never with you." They kissed there in the moonlight, beside the well that had brought them together, and Delilah felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the very first time, 22 years ago. Some things, she thought, never changed. Some feelings never faded. The years continued their steady march. Rose and Daniel had 3 children. James married a schoolteacher from Carson City and brought her back to the ranch, where she started a small school for the ranch children and others from nearby properties. Lily, to everyone's surprise, fell in love with a young doctor who had come to White Pine to set up a practice, and they built a house in town, though Lily spent most of her time at the ranch anyway, unable to stay away from the land she loved. By 1905, the Mitchell Ranch was one of the most successful operations in Nevada. They ran cattle and horses, maintained extensive gardens and orchards, and had even started a small dairy operation. Kane, now 52 but still strong and active, oversaw the daily operations with help from Henry and James. Delilah, at 50, managed the business side with Rose and Daniel, making decisions about sales, purchases, and investments. They had weathered droughts and storms, financial panics and market crashes, all the ups and downs that came with running a large operation. But the well, their well, had never failed. Year after year, it produced the same clean, sweet water that had saved the ranch in its darkest hour. In 1908, on a warm May morning, 30 years to the day after Kane had first ridden onto the property, the family gathered at the well for a special ceremony. It had been Lily's idea, supported enthusiastically by everyone else. They were going to dedicate a marker, a plaque that told the story of the well and what it meant to the family. Nearly 50 family members attended, from little ones barely old enough to walk to Delilah and Kane themselves, now in their 50s, but still vital and active. The plaque was simple, made of bronze, and it read, "Mitchell Family Well, Doug May, 1878, by Delilah O'Brien and Kane Mitchell. When enemies sought to destroy with poison, love responded with fresh water. May this well always remind us that building is stronger than destroying. Hope is more powerful than fear, and together we can overcome anything. As Delilah read the words aloud, her voice caught with emotion. Kane stood beside her, his hand in hers, and she could feel him trembling slightly with his own feelings. Their children and grandchildren stood around them, multiple generations connected by blood and by the land they all loved. My father used to say that water was life, Delilah said when she finished reading. He was right. But what I learned that summer, what Kane taught me, was that water is more than just survival. It is possibility. It is hope. It is the foundation on which everything else is built. She turned to look at Kane, this man who had saved her ranch and stolen her heart, who had stayed when he could have drifted on, who had chosen to build a life with her in the harsh but beautiful desert. Thank you, she said, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last. For stopping, for staying, for loving me. For all of this. Kane pulled her close, and they kissed to the sound of their family cheering. And then everyone took turns drinking from the well, the water as sweet and clean as it had been that first day, a reminder of what could be created when people chose love over hate, building over destroying, hope over despair. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and music and stories. The older grandchildren asked to hear the story of the well again, even though they had heard it dozens of times. Kane and Delilah told it together, trading off parts, finishing each other's sentences in the way of couples who had been together for decades. They told about the poisoned well, about Kane appearing like an answer to a prayer, about the back-breaking work of digging through rocky soil with uncertain prospects. They told about the moment water had seeped up from below, about the Garrett's fury, about falling in love while building a life. They told it all, holding nothing back, because it was the foundation story of their family, the legend that explained who they were and where they had come from. As the stars came out and the party began to wind down, Delilah found a quiet moment to sit on the porch with her daughters. Rose and Lily flanked her, both of them women now with children of their own, but still her girls. You know what I think about sometimes? Rose said thoughtfully. What would have happened if you had sold to the Garretts, if you had given up? We would not exist, Lily said simply. Not as we are. Maybe you and Henry would have been born, but James and I would not have. And none of our children. This whole thing, this family, this life, it all came from Mother refusing to give up. And from your father appearing exactly when I needed him, Delilah added. I was brave, I suppose, but I was also lucky. Lucky that the right man came along at the right time. Lucky that he saw something in me worth staying for. Lucky that he knew how to find water. It was not luck, Rose said firmly. It was fate. You two were meant to find each other. Delilah smiled. Her daughters were romantics, but maybe they were right. Maybe some things were meant to be. Kane joined them on the porch, settling into the chair beside Delilah with a satisfied sigh. That was a good day, he said. It was a perfect day, Delilah agreed. They sat together as the last of the guests departed, as the younger generation cleaned up from the party, as the ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms. The moon rose, nearly full, and cast silver light across the land that had been fought for, worked for, loved into prosperity. 30 years, Kane said softly. Has it really been 30 years? 30 years since you knocked on my door looking for work, Delilah confirmed. 30 years since you saved my life. Our life, Kane corrected. It has always been ours, from the moment that water came up from the ground. We built this together. Yes, Delilah agreed, lacing her fingers through his. Together. They sat there long into the night, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had turned a poisoned well into a thriving legacy, who had chosen love and hope and hard work over fear and despair. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone, something that had started with nothing more than desperate need and one man's willingness to dig. The well stood in the moonlight, a simple structure of stone and timber, but to the Mitchell family it was so much more. It was a symbol of resilience, of love, of the power of refusing to give up. It was a reminder that even when enemies tried to poison what you had built, you could dig deeper and find something clean and pure and good. It was, in the end, the heart of everything they had become, and the water flowed on, clear and sweet and endless, nourishing the land and the family that tended it, generation after generation, a testament to what two people could create when they chose to build together rather than stand alone. The ranch that had almost been destroyed had instead become a legacy, and the well that had saved it stood as eternal proof that hope, hard work, and love could overcome even the darkest threats. As Delilah and Kane finally rose to go inside, walking hand in hand toward the house they had filled with love and children and laughter, they passed the cottonwood tree that marked the old well. Its leaves rustled in the night breeze, and for just a moment, Delilah could have sworn she heard her father's voice on the wind, telling her he was proud, telling her she had done exactly what he had hoped she would do. She had taken his dream and made it real. She had found love in the process, and she had learned that sometimes the worst thing that could happen was actually the doorway to the best thing, if you were brave enough to walk through it. The house welcomed them with warm lamplight, and inside they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren being put to bed, their children talking quietly in the kitchen, the peaceful domestic symphony of a family at ease. This was what they had built. This was what the well had made possible. And as they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same room where Delilah had slept alone as a frightened young woman facing ruin, she thought about how far they had come. From poisoned water to fresh, from loneliness to love, from desperation to prosperity. It had all started with one cowboy willing to dig, one woman willing to trust, and the faith that somewhere beneath the rocky desert soil, life-giving water waited to be found. They had found it together. And in finding it, they had found everything else that mattered: home, family, love, and a future that stretched out before them as clear and endless as the Nevada sky.